Hello. In this lesson, I want to show you the game between Harikrishna and Magnus Carlsen. So Magnus was black here, and what is important here that Magnus was struggle how to find good idea here, how to continue. And that is why I call this lesson for grandmasters, because this is a typical position where Magnus is doing something what maybe his opponent doesn't understand. So let's first divide the board, and then we will see what black can play here. So always first divide the board and try to see where you should go with your pieces. Okay, we can see that on the king side we have something. I mean, we have more space. The knight is out of game. He can't enter because of our pawns and our rook and the knight. So they're protecting g6 square, and the knight is kind of stuck there. But this is only one piece, and someone needs to protect that g6 square for the knight, so then he can't escape. What else we can see here? The queen is kind of out of game on b6 because we can't attack on the queen side. There is no our pieces there, and as you can see, white is controlling c file, so we are not stronger on that side. So only thing what we can do is on the king side. But what to do? If we capture here, we will just undouble his pawns, and this is not good for us. Especially we are interested maybe about attack on this pawn on g3. But how to attack him? I mean, there is two defenders already, and even if we put the queen on d6, still it's nothing because white doesn't need to do anything, because he already defending that 2 times, and I don't see how we can increase attack, so it will be difficult. So what we can do here? Magnus played some move because he understands well endgames, and if you understand endgames, you will know exactly when it's time for you to enter in endgame. So what Magnus saw here, and what he's doing in a lot of his games is that he's exchanged the queens. I mean, his opponent can't figure out what he's doing, what Magnus is doing, because it's not something so obvious here. So Magnus played here queen d6. Idea is to force white to exchange the queens. Now black queen is kind of more active than on b6, because we have some attack on g3, and the white queen must stay there and to protect that. And also Magnus knew, I think, here that Harikrishna will play queen f4, because in that way we will exchange the queens, and that is what Magnus wanted from this position, because now he can enter in endgame. Okay, let's check now what, of course, white will capture with a g pawn, because with e pawn is even worse here, because he will create one more pawn island, so it's not good for white to do that. So, and also he undoubled the pawn, so why not? Okay, what Magnus realized here? So if Magnus enter in endgame, first there is one pawn who is weak here on e3. Second, probably white will try to open this knight so he can enter into game, so he will play g3. So g3 and e3 could be potential targets or weakness in white position for the rest of the game. So for that, first we need to exchange the bishops, because our bishop is so weak. How we know that our bishop is weak? Because we have pawns on light squares, and that means that we don't need light square bishop, because they are covering light squares. On the other side, white has light square bishop, and he's covering some holes, and the square on e4 is so strong for our knight, or maybe on c4 also. So we need to trade this bishop. And after we trade that, it's not the same that white can use maybe e5 square and we can use e4 square, because when we put the knight on e4, we are attacking something. We are attacking the pawn on g3. If he puts the knight on e5, he's not attacking anything. So it's a big difference. So that means that white will be forced in the future to be passive because of his pawn structure. This is already some huge advantage for Magnus. Okay, so this is something deep. That is why I'm calling this lesson lesson for grandmasters, because it's so deep, and I think everyone can learn something from this lesson. Okay, let's see how Magnus improve his position move by move, because for now he's so passive with his pieces. First he needs to deal with this rook, so he wants to go on 7th rank, so we need to stop that somehow, and that is why knight c8. Of course, final destination of that knight is probably on d6. From that place we can jump on some other squares, and that knight could be useful. But also we are interesting from this d6 square to exchange finally this bishop, because his bishop is better than ours, so that is why we want to exchange him. So knight c8 is so important move here. Okay, so g3, white is doing what we already know that he will do that. I mean, we expect that, so why not? He wants to bring the knight in the game, which is so logical thing. Knight d6, knight g2, king d8. Okay, he closed completely the rook, and also maybe he's preparing to involve his rook in the game. So we will see. I think that Magnus doesn't want to trade the rooks, because in that case he can't be that sure that he can take some of those pawns on g3 or e3. So for now he wants to keep the rooks in the game, and he can do that. So rook g7, king g2, then bishop b5. Okay, we want to trade, and after that we want to bring the knight in the game. So some of those squares will be next destination of our knight. Knight d3 and then knight c4. Okay, why first knight c4? First, he wants to move the rook from this place. The king can't help here because of the pawn on h3, and there is no other pieces who can defend the pawn, so rook e3 is something what is forced here for white, and then we can bring the rook on open file for us. Okay, so time after time you can see that black is now more active, and white is forced to be passive because of his pawn structure. Black has better pawn structure, and also he has more space, so both sides, both things are really important in this position. Okay, so we exchange, and this exchange is probably better for black. Yes, that's probably in that case white king can go whenever he wants, and he can do some defensive things. But now we have open h file, so we can use that for our rook, especially to attack the pawn on g3. But what else white can do here? I mean, he must do something and to release the king from h3 pawn. So king f1 now, king d7. We are improving positions of our kings. I mean both sides, and then king d1. Okay, so now we change destination of our knight, so we are interested now to attack the pawn on g3, because white can't exchange anymore the rooks. This is not option because of the pawn here, and there is no such thing. So, and the king also is not anymore there to protect the pawn, so now we want to attack the pawn on g3. Okay, the only move here for white is to play rook g2, and after that king d6. We involve our king in the game more. Okay, we will see. In some moment we really need our king, and of course this is endgame, so why not to improve position of our king? We have time. Okay, so then white wants to exchange the knights, but of course if we trade now, probably that will be not maybe draw position, but why to trade? Let him to trade, and then we have great pawn on e4. So let's keep that like this, what we have now. So rook h7. We said already that the pawn on g3 is vulnerable, and also in some moment maybe we can evolve the rook from other side, and we can attack again the pawns on the other side, because the king can't protect both pawns on e3 and on b2. For now the pawn on b2 is not vulnerable because the rook is protecting him, but we will see later what will happen. So king e2 and then king c6. King c6 is connected with idea to put the rook on h1 and then to attack those pawns. But as long the pawn is on b2, we can't take him. Why? Because the rook is protecting him. So with king c6, Magnus wants to provoke pawns from b2, and probably Harikrishna must move that pawn, because he wants to, I mean black wants to bring the king up, and then the king will be also active piece. So white needs to stop that somehow. So king d3, king b5, and then b3. Okay, probably must play move in this situation. But now the pawns are not anymore on the second rank, so of course black can try to take them, or we will see. Okay, so a5. Then white took the knight. Idea with that is to just simplify position, and this knight is not doing anything for us, and now the rook is more active, so why not? Okay, we capture, of course, with the d pawn. Then king c3, we return now the king on c6. Okay, why we return the king on c6? Magnus saw opportunity here that probably he will try to chase those pawns. Something he will capture, definitely, because white can't protect everything. The rook is protecting just one pawn, but nothing else. He can't protect everything. And if we take the pawn on e3, then it's so important to be active with our king, because then we can capture the pawn on d4. That is why king c6 in this moment. a4, rook h1, and then b4. And now, because Magnus played perfect here, now he has winning position. Everything because of queen d6 and then queen f4, they exchange the queens. Everything because of that. But now he made small mistake. He played here first rook e1. Better move was rook c1. First check, because the king will be on some side now. So he needs to go on d2 or b2. So it's a different, because then we can attack different pawns. So king d2, then of course we will attack the pawns on the queen side. So if he goes on different side, then of course on e3. It's so logical. So rook a1, then king c3, we can check him first, and after king c4, then we can capture the pawn. We pinned this pawn. Rook b2 to protect that, but we have a check, and then one more check. He must protect the pawn here, but we have one more check, and then a4. Idea with that is to create for us a pass pawn, and this is now totally winning position. White can play just rook c2, and then after king b6, because we want to secure this pawn. This is much more important pawn than this one, because then we will have two connected pass pawns. Then we can focus on this one to take him, and then when we capture that pawn, still our king is in the square, so white can't push the pawn, because when he goes here we can just bring the king down and to protect that pawn from promotion. On the other side we don't have that problem, because we have two connected pass pawns, so white king can't do anything. So maybe rook e7, but after rook b2 we can start to push our pawn, and then the game is totally winning for black. Okay, so after rook e1, I mean, this was a small mistake, but still it's a winning position for black. Rook f2, rook c2, sorry. Then king d6, king d2, rook g1. Now we focus on this one, because he's exposed to attack and nobody can protect him. But then white capture here, and for now we don't have material advantage, but of course we have better pawn structure, so this should be also winning. So rook g2 first check, just to move the king on more passive square, and then we capture the pawn. Now it's a tempo move, because nobody's protecting the pawn. So rook c3, and then rook f3. Again, small mistake for Magnus. Instead of that, better move was rook g1, and after king e2 we can push the pawn. What is the difference when you put the rook on f3 and when you put the rook on g1? You will see now. So after rook c8 we can just play rook a1, and now the game is winning for us, because we can sacrifice this pawn, but we can enter in a pawn endgame, and pawn endgame is totally winning for black, because those pawns worth like one pawn, and because of better position of our pawns and our king as well, we can easily win this game. So we just need to bring our king and to capture this pawn. White can't do anything. He will be in Suswang. So after king f2 we can just play king d2, and now the pawn will fall, because he must play something. And after b takes on a6, now black can play king d3, and nobody can secure this pawn anymore, because white needs to play something, and when he moves the king we can capture this pawn, and then we can capture a couple of more pawns, and this is totally winning, of course. Okay, so that is why rook g1 was better. Also, if white plays here rook b3, then we can just win easily this game with rook h1, and nobody can save this pawn anymore from promotion. So we can just push the pawn, and the king can't do anything, because he's stuck there. So that is why he must go on c8, and then what we already saw. Okay, so rook f3 Magnus played. Still, this is a winning position, but they need to play more moves. King e2, then g3, rook c8, rook f2 check, king e1, and okay, Magnus focus now on those pawns. Probably he will capture them in the future, we will see. King f1, rook a3 first. Again, mistake for Magnus. He should play rook a4, and after king g2 he should capture this pawn, and after king g3, rook a2, rook d8, king e7, and after rook b8, rook b2, and this is a winning position. Okay, so rook a3 Magnus played, but still he can win the game, but now he needs to play really good. Okay, so rook b8. So Magnus played here rook e3, but this wasn't the best move, and after rook e3 the game is draw. Instead of that, he should capture the pawn on a4, and after rook b7, then to capture on a5, and after rook g7, he can just trade this pawn for the rook and of course for his rook, and endgame, pawn endgame is still winning for black. So king e2, and then he can just push the pawn. If white goes on different side, then we can check him, and if he takes now, we can just focus on this pawn and we will have again one pawn more. So for example, king e2, and then we can push the pawn, and we know already that this is a winning position for black, because pawn and game is better. We have better pawn structure and better position for our king, so this should be winning for black. Okay, but Magnus capture on e3, and now it's a draw position. Let's see how they play this game. Rook b7 and then rook a3. And now Harikrishna played here rook b4. But there is one tricky move here and a little bit better move, and that is rook b6 first. Check. And now the king is forced to go on 7th rank, which is maybe not logical because the king will be more passive. But for example, if he goes on d5, maybe black can lose the game. How? We will see now. So rook b4 now. What is the difference? The difference is when white start to push the pawn, then he can promote with check. Because the rook is now protecting the pawn on a4, and probably black won't be able to bring the rook down. Of course he can, but then he will lose the pawn here. So let's see what will happen if black start race, who will promote first. So rook a2 first, a6, and then after e3, a7, we can check king e1, and after g2 white can promote the queen, and now it's a winning position for white. Of course there is a better move, better variation here for black, but I just wanted to show you how white can win if we start race because of the king on d5. Okay, so in the game was instead rook b6, rook b4, and after that Magnus pushed the pawn, rook b2, king d5, king g2, and then Magnus capture on a4, sorry. Better move here was king e4 first, and when white capture, then rook a1. So now he's focused more on this pawn, and maybe he can capture one more pawn, and still he has a chance to stop those pawns from promotion. So a6, he can bring the rook on different side, but now the white king will be out of game, and then rook g8 to stop this pawn from promotion. And after a7, of course, we can just put the rook on 8th rank or a8, and now the pawn will fall because white rook must protect our pawn from promotion. So that is why he can't save his pawn, because we can just push. So in the next move we can capture the pawn, and then we can capture one more pawn, and now still white will be in worse position. I mean, black will win the game. So we can just focus on our pawns now, and with we have two connected pass pawns, so this is a winning position now. But everything because of rook b4. White played rook b4 here. That was mistake. Instead of that, he should play rook b6. But okay. So now rook, we already saw that, and rook a4. So rook a4 was mistake, king e4 instead of that. But okay. Now after rook a4, king g3, and then Magnus played king e4, but now it's a different situation because the rook can't help in moving white king on some out of game. So this is the different. Rook a1, and then white capture on e6, king d3, and he pushed the pawn. So we push the pawn also, Magnus capture, and after king f2, rook h7 check, and now it looks like that still black can win this game, but no, it's a draw now. Let's see how. I mean, white must take the pawn, and as you can see, we have better position of our king in pawn endgame, but it's a draw. Okay, we capture, and now if you want, take a pause, try to see what white should play here and how to draw this position. For everyone who knows that, congratulations, because it's not some usual move here, but who understand end games with pawns, just it's so easy move. So in this move, in this position, white should play king f1, and now it's a draw position because what else black can play here? He must take the pawn. If he goes on f3, we can just move the king. So we are waiting black to capture the pawn. So eventually he must capture, and then we can play king f2. And now it's a position of kings, and this is classical position and theoretical position, and we can say that this is totally draw now. For someone who don't understand this, I can show you. So black must move the king, and I didn't tell you that in this moment they draw. So of course they know that this is a draw. So when black moves the king, the most important thing for white is to just follow black king. And when black start to push the pawn, then put the king in front of the pawn, nothing else. So when black push the pawn again, put the king in front of the pawn. Don't go here, because if you go here, then black can catch you in opposition of king. So put the king here, and now it's a draw because after king f1, black must protect the pawn, and this is only square to protect the pawn, and then it's a stalemate. Okay, so only because of queen d6, Magnus has so opportunities to win the game, but eventually, because of great game from Harikrishna, they draw this game. But this was so great game for both sides. Thank you. If you watched this video, please like this video, subscribe, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.